The girl's mouth was bleeding, and she was completely naked. Her legs, split in a sexual position, left blood everywhere in the hallway. She was completely naked and covered in pieces of clothing. They crushed her glasses in her face, swelled her eyes with blood, and eventually choked her to death. This is the Kolkata doctor gang rape and murder case. On the morning of August 9, 2024, in the city of Kolkata, India, one such news story comes out which shakes the whole country. This was the story of a 31-year-old female doctor who was undergoing her training at the Regional Medical College and Hospital in Kolkata. The murder and rape of this woman doctor in a place considered safe like a hospital was very shocking. The incident came to light after the doctor's post-mortem examination. This report shook the soul of the people because this case was not just one murder, but a much more horrific case than the post-mortem. The report revealed that the doctor was strangled to death. With such force, his thyroid cartilage was also broken. Before this murder, the doctor had tried to save his life. Several injury marks were found on his body. The most frightening truth came to light when injury marks were found on the private parts of the doctor. It was clear that it was not just a case of murder, but it was a nose murder committed after rape. Such a big incident happens in the premises of the hospital, and no one even hears the news. Was there anything that happened that night that you would be angry about? Was there anyone else who committed this heinous act? And if so, who? So who was he? Answering these questions, we will tell you in this video what happened. That night, when you face the truth in the serene campus of this medical college, you will surely get goosebumps. In the busy city of Kolkata, Mamita Debnath was like a quiet flame that burned brightly but quietly. She was born in 1993 in the busy streets of Sodhpur, West Bengal, and was taught to be disciplined, persistent, and kind. Saker Ranjan Debnath, her father, worked hard as a tailor, and Mamita admired the way her mother ran the house without saying a word. While they didn't have a lot of money, they had a lot of love and morals. Since she was young, Mamita has been a great student, standing out not only for being smart but also for being quiet and determined. In 10th grade, she got an impressive 90% on her tests, and by the time she graduated from high school, she had gotten 89%. Her parents were amazed by all she had done, but Mamita rarely bragged. She thought that her actions should speak for themselves, so she kept going after excellence without stopping or making a fuss. It seemed like there was always ambition in the air around her. It seemed like she was destined to be great, but she stayed grounded, always humble, and always kind. Mamita knew she wanted to study medicine, even though she had passed the JEE and other medical entrance exams, and could choose from a number of prestigious jobs. She signed up to become a doctor at the College of Medicine and J&M Hospital in Kalyani, Nadia. She wished to help people get better, save lives, and fix a world that seemed broken more often than not. She became interested in gardening while she was studying to be a doctor. During her breaks, Mamita took care of plants in the college garden and watched them grow from young plants to fully grown adults. She saw herself in those plants, weak but strong, patient but determined. She took care of them with love, care, and attention to detail, just like she planned to take care of her own patients one day. Outside of school, Mamita was known for her deep love of animals, especially stray cats and dogs. She fed stray dogs and cats all the time on the streets of Kolkata. She always had cookies in her bag to make sure that any hungry animal that came across her got something to eat. A lot of people wondered why Mamita, a young woman with a lot of responsibilities, would take time out of her day to care for these animals. For her, it wasn't about time, it was just who she was. Even though Mamita's medical studies were hard, she kept doing well and was eventually hired as a trainee doctor in the chest medicine department at the G.Kar Medical College and Hospital in Kolkata. She was working on her PhD because she was very interested in medicine and wanted to move it to the next level. She worked long days and often couldn't sleep at night, but she never gave up on her job. People who worked with her often couldn't believe how she managed to balance the tough demands of her training with her other interests and studies. But her light was doomed to go out too soon, like all bright flames. Something changed in the halls of the R. On the morning of August 9, 2024, School of Medicine and Hospital G.Kar. In the hallways, where people usually shuffle their feet, whisper, and sometimes hear machines humming, it was strangely quiet. Someone last saw Momita walking toward a seminar hall. She had been on duty the night before. After her long shift, she was supposed to rest, but by mid-morning, she was nowhere to be found. At first, her absence wasn't given much thought. She might have moved to a different ward or stayed in a quieter part of the hospital for a long time to rest. But as the hours went by, her co-workers started to worry. As the hospital staff began to search the building, calls to her phone went unanswered. Staff and medical students talked in whispers, whispers of worry and whispers of a woman who was missing. No one could have been ready for what they saw when they finally found Momita. Her body was found partially naked, with bleeding from her eyes, mouth, and genitalia. It was impossible to handle how horrible the scene was. The hospital staff quickly called Momita's parents and told them she was sick. When her parents called again to find out more, they were told the terrible news. She had killed herself. The hospital, which was once known for its great medical care, became a scandalous place. They were not allowed to see their daughter's body when they got to the hospital. As the days turned into weeks and then months, they were still not allowed to end the story. The pain of losing their daughter was made worse by the fact that no one knew how she died. They would be in pain for 3 years because they would not be able to say goodbye to Momita for good. When the autopsy report was finally made public, it showed unspeakable violence. It turned out that Momita had been raped and killed by being strangled. The report talked about the cuts and scrapes she had on her lips, left leg, right hand, ring finger, neck, and face. There was 150 milligrams of semen in her vagina, which suggested that she may have been raped by more than one person. The harsh reality of her death was very different from the initial story that she had killed herself, which made people wonder what had really happened to her. As word got around that Momita had died, anger spread like wildfire across the country. Not only in Kolkata, but in cities all over India, her story led to protests. Medical students, doctors, and people who fight for women's rights all wanted justice. There were a lot of calls for accountability on social media, and the medical community backed her up and pushed for stronger security on hospital campuses. The head of RE, Dr. Sandeep Ghosh, who works at G. Carr Medical College, was in the middle of the trouble. He was charged with not making sure his students were safe, which made him feel very bad. Dr. Ghosh quit his job because of a lot of pressure from both social media and politicians. Making him the principal of Calcutta National Medical College so quickly, on the other hand, only made people more angry. How could a man who was being accused of being careless be given another important job? The case got attention from all over the world, with protests in London, New York, and Berlin, among other places. Thousands of people marched through Kolkata streets with the slogan, "Women, reclaim the night." They wanted safety and freedom for all women, not just justice for Momita. At night, they carried candles, which cast a soft glow on their faces. They chanted, "Justice for Momita," over and over again. But justice didn't seem to be close. A special investigating team, SIT of 7 people, was put together on August 10th, 2024, to look into Momita's death. When the team looked into it, they found Sanjay Roy, who is also known as Sanjoy Roy and is a volunteer with the Kolkata Police's disaster management group. Roy was no stranger to trouble. He had been charged with extortion, intimidating women, and making threats against them in the past. A torn earphone was found in the seminar room where Momita's body had been found, which proved that he had something to do with her death. Roy went into the emergency building at 4 a.m. while wearing a Bluetooth device around his neck, as shown on CCTV footage. After 40 minutes, he left, but the headphones were nowhere to be found. They were paired with Roy's cell phone when police found those same earphones. Even though the evidence kept growing, doubts lingered. Was Roy the only one who did it, or was there something more evil going on? Some people said that Momita had found out about an illegal activity going on in the hospital that someone wanted to keep secret. Was the killing of her a way to get back at her? The Calcutta High Court sent the case to the Central Bureau of Investigation, CBI, on August 13, 2024, because they were worried about how the state police were handling it. People were afraid that important evidence would be lost if they kept running the investigation. As soon as the CBI took over, there was new hope for justice. But people also knew that the road ahead would be long and full of problems. The protests that began in India quickly spread to other countries. A lot of people came together in Bangladesh, Pakistan, Canada, Germany, the UK, Australia, and the US to demand that Mamita be given justice. Her story spread around the world as a call for women's safety and justice, cutting across cultural and geographical lines. The fight for Mamita became a symbol of the fight against violence against women around the world. A group of protesters broke into R.G. Carr Medical College, going on to damage hospital property. As a response, the police used tear gas and batons to fight the protesters, which turned violent and hurt several people. 19 protesters were arrested, but they didn't change their minds. The large-scale protests in Kolkata, India, and other places showed how powerful it is when people are angry at the same thing. India woke up on August 15, 2024, not to the usual Independence Day celebrations, but to the aftermath of a very bad night's sleep. The protesters broke into R.G. The Carr Medical College and Hospital had left their mark the day before, not only on the land, but also on the hearts and minds of everyone in the country. The hospital, which used to be a sign of hope and healing, was now a sad reminder of a young life that had been lost in terrible ways. A lot of protesters were hurt in the fight with the police. People all over the country were shocked to see doctors and students seeking justice being hit with batons and tear gas canisters. On the news, there were pictures of people with their faces bloodied and barricades on fire, as well as interviews with people who had been at the front of the protests. It was clear that Mamita's case had touched a lot of people, and not just because it was so violent. It also showed how serious problems there are in India with safety, justice, and women's rights. Even though there was violence and arrests, the movement grew stronger. Women Reclaim the Night was the slogan for the protests, which had one message. Women should never have to worry about their safety, no matter what time of day it is. Women with signs that said justice for Mamita, end violence against women, and we will not be silenced were out in the streets of Kolkata, Delhi, Mumbai, and other big cities. The medical community also didn't give up in their search for justice. The doctors at RG services at Carr Medical College and Hospital were shut down completely, except for emergency care. It was clear what they wanted to say. They would not stop until justice was done. Thousands of doctors from all over the country stood with them. States like Maharashtra, Delhi, and Tamil Nadu held similar protests and strikes. The doctors came together in a way that had never been seen before. They were so united that they demanded justice for one of their own. The investigation into Mamita's death became more important when the Central Bureau of Investigation, CBI, joined the case. The case was now being looked at very closely, and every detail was being looked at very carefully. Toxicology tests were done on the torn earphones that were found at the crime scene, and CCTV footage from the hospital was watched over and over again in the hopes of finding more clues. Sanjay Roy, the volunteer who was arrested on suspicion of having something to do with Mamita's death, continued to say that he was not guilty. But there was strong evidence against him. It was proven by the forensic examination that the earphones found in the seminar hall were indeed paired with his phone. Not only that, but his DNA was found at the crime scene, which is another link between him and the murder. Even with this damning evidence, there were still questions. Was Roy acting alone, or was there a bigger plot going on? Others at Mamita's job thought that her death wasn't just an accident, but was planned and carried out. In the hospital, rumors spread that Mamita had found something that was corrupt and put her life in danger, like an illegal organ trafficking ring or something else. Even though these rumors were mostly just guesses, they made an already complicated case even more so. Because they had to solve the case quickly, the CBI didn't leave any clues. They talked to people who worked at the hospital, doctors, and anyone else who might have seen or talked to Mamita in the days before she died. They looked through hospital records for any strange things that might fit with the idea of a plot. But even though they looked into it thoroughly, they couldn't find a clear reason for the horrible crime itself. The protests kept going even as the investigation took longer. Women's rights activists held vigils with candles to remember Mamita. Many called her a martyr in the fight against violence against women. Her story became a symbol of the larger fight for women's safety in India. This fight had already gotten international attention with cases like the brutal rape and murder of Jyoti Singh, Nirbhaya, in 2012. Protests were held in cities around the world, from London to Sydney, to show support for Mamita and the Indian women. The worldwide uproar showed how frustrated people were with how the system failed to protect women from violence and give justice to victims. Many people saw Mamita's story as not just about one woman, but about all the women whose lives had been cut short by violence and whose stories had not been told. Following Mamita's sad death on August 9, 2024, the protests did not lessen in intensity as the days went by. The medical community stayed united in their call for justice, and women's rights groups kept holding vigils and rallies in her honor. The fight for justice was still going on August 22, 2024. The fights in court, the investigations, and the public outcry had not yet led to a solution. Protests with the slogan "Women, Reclaim the Night" were still going on in cities all over India and the world. Women kept fighting for more rights and safety, and they wouldn't let Mamita's story go away. The Central Bureau of Investigation, CBI, was actively gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and putting together the events that led to her death. The investigation was still in its early stages. Even though Sanjay Roy was still the main suspect, there was still a chance of a bigger plot, and the investigation was moving slowly because it was so complicated. People all over the world changed because of Mamita's case. Doctors' protests and strikes started a national conversation about how to keep women safe, especially in places like hospitals where they work long hours and late shifts and are more likely to be attacked. At different medical institutions, people were already talking about how to improve security to protect their staff. Even though her parents were still upset and grieving over the death of their only daughter, they were also fighting for justice by pushing the government to make sure that the people who killed their daughter would be held responsible. They still hadn't found peace because the case wasn't over. Indian society would never be the same after Mamita's death, but it was too early to talk about her legacy. Protests, strikes, and calls for justice were all signs that the country was having a hard time with long-term problems with safety and violence against women. Even though she had only been dead for a short time, her story was already having an effect on people all over the country. My friend Mamita Debnath's story was still going on, and her fight for justice was not over yet. Over the next few years, Mamita's name became linked to the fight in India for women's rights and safety. People all over the world heard her story in schools, courts, and conferences. In India, women's rights groups used her case as a rallying cry to call for stronger protections for women, especially in places of work like hospitals where they were often at risk during late-night shifts. After Mamita's death, there were big changes made to the R.G. Kar Medical College and Hospital, which had been the site of many tragedies. There were stricter rules put in place to make sure the safety of staff and students, and new CCTV cameras were installed all over the building to improve security. The hospital also created a scholarship in Mamita's honor, which is given every year to a bright female medical student who has done well in school and cares about social justice. But the most important thing about Mamita's death might have been how it inspired a whole generation of young women to fight for their rights. Women all over India set up workshops on self-defense, made support networks, and pushed for changes to the law to protect women from violence. They spoke out against the culture of silence that often surrounded these kinds of crimes because they wouldn't be quieted themselves. Friends and co-workers of Mamita still find inspiration in remembering her life. How quietly determined she was to study, how kind she was to animals, and how much she loved gardening. In life, she helped people get better, and now that she's gone, she's a symbol of strength and grace. A memoir of life. Mamita Debnath lived a life full of promise, hard work, and quiet strength. With her strong desire to help people and make the world a better place, she was about to have a great career in medicine. Her tragic death was a stark reminder of how dangerous it still is for women to live in a world that doesn't care much about their safety. But Mamita's ideas lived on after she died. She was remembered not for the harm she had suffered, but for the good she had done in the world through the people she helped, the animals she took care of, the plants she grew, the friends she comforted, and the patients she healed. Her story shows that every life, no matter how short, has the power to make a big difference. Even though Mamita's flame went out too soon, it lives on in the hearts of those who remember her. In the end, Momita Debnath was more than just a victim of a terrible crime. She was also a light of hope for a world that needed to get better. India was the starting point for the protests, which quickly spread to other countries nearby. A significant number of individuals from Bangladesh, Pakistan, Canada, Germany, the United Kingdom, Australia, and the United States of America came together to demand that justice be served to Momita. Her story became a rallying cry for the protection and justice of women all over the world, transcending both cultural and geographical boundaries through its dissemination. The fight for Momita went on to become a symbol of the global fight against violence against women. The R.G. Carr Medical College was broken into by a group of protesters, who then proceeded to cause damage to the hospital's property. The police used tear gas and batons in response to the protesters, which led to the protesters becoming violent and causing injuries to a number of people. However, despite being arrested, the protesters did not change their minds about their position. The demonstrations that took place on a massive scale in Kolkata, India, as well as in other locations, demonstrated how powerful it is when people are frustrated about the same thing. It was not the typical Independence Day celebrations that greeted India on August 15, 2024. Rather, it was the aftermath of a terrible night's sleep that this country experienced. They broke into RG with their protesters. Not only had Carr Medical College and Hospital left their mark on the land the day before, but they had also left their mark on the hearts and minds of every single person in the country. Previously, the hospital was a symbol of hope and healing. However, it had become a sad reminder of a young life that had been taken from this world in a manner that was beyond comprehension. Many protesters sustained injuries as a result of the altercation with the police. It shocked people all over the country to see students and doctors seeking justice being attacked with batons and tear gas canisters. Interviews with people who had been at the forefront of the demonstrations, as well as pictures of people with bloodied faces and barricades on fire, were broadcast on the news. It was clear that the Momita case had affected a large number of people, and this was not simply due to the fact that it was so violent. This case also demonstrated the significant issues in India regarding safety, justice, and the rights of women. In spite of the fact that there was violence and arrests, the movement continued to gain momentum. "Women, Reclaim the Night" was the slogan that was used for the demonstrations, which had a single message: women should never have to worry about their safety, regardless of the time of day. Signs that read "Justice for Momita" and "Violence against women" and "We will not be silenced" were carried by women who were seen walking around the streets of Kolkata, Delhi, Mumbai, and other major cities. The medical community, on the other hand, did not give up in their pursuit of justice. Except for those who provide emergency care, the doctors working at RG services at Carr Medical College and Hospital were completely cut off from their duties. Their message was unmistakable. They refused to surrender until justice was served. Thousands of medical professionals from all over the country joined them in solidarity. The protests and strikes that took place in states such as Maharashtra, Delhi, and Tamil Nadu were comparable. It had never been seen before, but the doctors came together in a way that had never been witnessed before. They were so united that they demanded justice for all of their colleagues. The involvement of the Central Bureau of Investigation, CBI, in the investigation into Momita's death increased the investigation's significance. At this point, the case was being examined in great detail, and every fact was being scrutinized with great attention to detail. In an effort to uncover additional hints, toxicology tests were performed on the torn earphones discovered at the crime scene. Additionally, surveillance footage from the hospital was viewed multiple times in a repeated manner. After being arrested on suspicion of having some connection to Momita's death, Sanjay Roy, the volunteer who was arrested, continued to insist that he was innocent of the charges against him. The evidence against him, however, was quite substantial. The forensic investigation proved beyond a reasonable doubt that the earphones found in the lecture hall were indeed his phone. Furthermore, the discovery of his DNA at the crime scene further solidifies his connection to the murder. Even with the availability of this damning evidence, questions remained. Was Roy acting alone, or was there a larger plot? Others who worked at Momita's place of employment believed that her death was not just an accident, but rather a premeditated and intentional act. Hospital rumors circulated that Mamita had discovered a shady organ trafficking ring or something else that threatened her life. Because these rumors were mostly speculations, they complicated an already complicated situation. Because they needed to solve the case as soon as possible, the CBI did not leave any clues. The CBI interviewed individuals who worked at the hospital, medical professionals, and anyone else who might have seen or spoken to Mamita in the days leading up to her passing. They searched through the hospital's medical records for any peculiar occurrences that might be consistent with the concept of a plot. Despite conducting a comprehensive investigation, they were unable to pinpoint a specific reason for the heinous crime. Despite the fact that the investigation took longer, the demonstrations continued. To remember Mamita, activists for women's rights held vigils carrying candles. Many people refer to her as a martyr in the struggle against male aggression against females. Over time, her story has become emblematic of the larger struggle for the protection of women in India. The 2012 brutal rape and murder of Jyoti Singh, Nirbhaya, was one of the cases that brought this fight to the attention of the international community. With the intention of demonstrating solidarity with Mamita and the Indian women, demonstrations were held in cities all over the world, ranging from London to Sydney. The outcry that occurred all over the world demonstrated how dissatisfied people were with the method by which the system failed to protect women from violence and provide victims with justice. There were a lot of people who thought that Mamita's story was not just about one woman, but about all of the women whose lives had been cut short by violence and whose stories had not been told. In the days that followed the tragic death of Mamita on August 9, 2024, the level of intensity of the demonstrations did not decrease whatsoever. Both the medical community and women's rights organizations continued to hold vigils and rallies in her honor. The medical community remained united in their call for justice. As of August 22, 2024, the struggle for justice was still ongoing. The legal battles, the investigations, and the outcry from the general public had not yet resulted in a definitive resolution. Protests with the slogan "Women, Reclaim the Night" were still taking place in cities all over India and the rest of the world. Women continued to fight for increased rights and safety, and they refused to take Mamita's story out of the conversation. In order to piece together the sequence of events that led to her passing, the Central Bureau of Investigation, CBI, was actively collecting evidence, conducting interviews with witnesses, and putting together the puzzle. It was still in its preliminary stages when the investigation began. Despite the fact that Sanjay Roy remained the primary suspect, there was still a possibility that there was a larger plot taking place, and the investigation was moving slowly because it was so complicated. Changes occurred in people all over the world as a direct result of Mamita's case. Medical professionals' demonstrations and strikes sparked a national discussion about the best ways to protect women, particularly in settings like hospitals where they are more vulnerable to assault due to their long shifts and long hours of work. At a variety of medical facilities, individuals were already discussing ways to enhance security in order to safeguard their employees. Her parents, still upset and grieving over the loss of their only daughter, were also fighting for justice, exerting pressure on the government to hold those responsible for their daughter's death accountable for their actions. Because the investigation was still ongoing, they had not yet found peace. Because of Mamita's passing, Indian society would never be the same again. However, it was too soon to discuss the legacy she would leave behind. A number of indicators, including demonstrations, strikes, and calls for justice, indicated that the nation was struggling to deal with persistent issues pertaining to the safety of women and violence against them. Her story was already impacting people all over the country, despite the fact that she had only been dead for a short period of time. My friend Mamita Debna's story was still unfolding, and she had yet to reach the end of her struggle for justice. Over the next few years, Mamita's name became associated with the struggle throughout India for women's protection and rights. Schools, courts, and conferences around the world told her story. Women's rights organizations in India used her case as a rallying cry to call for stronger protections for women, particularly in places of employment such as hospitals, where they were frequently at risk during late-night shifts. The R.G. Kar Medical College and Hospital, the scene of several unfortunate events, underwent significant alterations immediately following Mamita's passing. The hospital installed new closed-circuit television cameras throughout the entire building and tightened the existing rules to ensure the safety of both staff and students. The hospital also established a scholarship in Momita's name. The hospital annually awards this scholarship to a remarkable female medical student who has demonstrated academic excellence and a strong commitment to the cause of social justice. It may have been Momita's death that inspired a generation of young women to fight for their rights. Women all over India organized workshops on self-defense, established support networks, and made efforts to change the law to protect women from violence. They refused to remain silent and spoke out against the culture of silence that often surrounded crimes of this nature. Friends and co-workers of Momita continue to find motivation in recalling her life, particularly the quiet determination with which she pursued her education, the compassion with which she treated animals, and the passion with which she cultivated her garden. While she was alive, she assisted others in getting better, and now that she has passed away, she is a representation of grace and strength. A record of one's life. Momita Debnath lived a life filled with promise, hard work, and quiet strength. Because she had such a strong desire to assist others and make the world a better place, she was looking forward to having a successful career in the medical field. The tragic circumstances that led to her passing served as a stark reminder of how perilous it is for women to continue to live in a world that does not place a high priority on their safety. However, long after her death, people continued to discuss Momita's ideas. People remembered her not for the harm she had endured, but for the good she had done in the world through the people she assisted, the animals she cared for, the plants she grew, the friends she comforted, and the patients she healed. According to her story, every single life, regardless of how brief it may be, possesses the potential to make a significant impact. Despite the premature extinguishment of Momita's flame, it persists in the hearts of those who honor her. Momita Debnath was more than just a victim of a terrible crime in the end. She was a victim of this crime. In addition to this, she was a beacon of optimism for a world that desperately needed to improve.